At this time, I'd like to call a meeting to order. Would you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Clerk, please call the roll.
Commissioner Walsh.
Here.
Doherty.
Here.
Commissioner Strack.
Here.
Commissioner Miller.
Here.
Commissioner Meyer.
Here.
Commissioner Sabota.
Here.
Commissioner Thacker.
Here.
All present.
Thank you, Dorothy. At this point, legally, I need to open the floor to the public.
No sign zone.
Yeah. Seeing as there's no one in the gallery, I'll close the public portion of the meeting. At this time, I would be looking for consideration of the approval of the 2018 meeting dates. Excuse me, I'm sorry. I jumped ahead on the agenda. See how I am? I'd be looking for approval of the November 15th regular meeting notes.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Doherty. Clerk, please call the roll.
Commissioner Strack.
Yes.
Commissioner Miller.
Yes.
Commissioner Meyer.
Yes.
Commissioner Sabota.
Yes.
Commissioner Thacker.
Yes.
Commissioner Walsh.
Yes.
Commissioner Doherty.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to look for consideration of the approval of the 2018 Planning and Zoning Commission meeting schedule. Does anybody have any revisions or changes to that schedule? Mr. Walsh?
Yeah, I don't know if it matters, but the days of the week are messed up. So the 15th, like all those days, say Wednesday, it should be Thursday. The day of the week is Thursday for 2018. Let's remove it to Thursday.
Really?
For all of them?
Yeah, and then December 14th, that's actually a Friday. I thought we were having a holiday party.
Leap year. Yeah.
You just got a promotion?
I didn't do this on my own. That's all I'm gonna
It's a
say.
Thursday. It is set for Thursdays.
I think her boss
What
approved
are we
it though.
meeting at?
I
Oh,
did not,
absolutely.
Right.
Because of the boss, yeah.
I did not do this on my own, so hold on, let me.
Yeah, the dates are Thursdays.
Yeah.
They're not Wednesdays.
Is everybody okay with the Wednesdays?
Either day is fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
So let me say out loud, do you want me to say out loud what they would be?
Yeah, why don't you do that?
The 17th, and I'm looking at a calendar.
Can you say the month too?
Okay,
Let's go.
hold on.
Well, don't we normally meet on Thursday?
No,
No.
January 17th.
Thursday. Okay. I'm sorry, Dorothy, I missed February.
I didn't do February
Okay.
yet. Something's wrong with this computer.
Be the 14th.
I got it now, hold on.
Just put these all in my planner.
Okay, January 17th, Wednesday, February 14th, sorry. March 14th. April 11th. I'm just verifying against the calendar, so. May 16th. June 20th. July 18th. August 15th. September 19th. October 17th. November 14th. And December is a Thursday, and it is December 13th. At 7:30 p.m. Thank you for catching me.
Yes, I apologize for that.
I'm sorry Doug made you do that over again.
So now that we have a revised schedule, does anyone have any conflicts or questions or concerns over that schedule? And we will reprint and have Dorothy resend that to all of us. If that date works, could I get a motion to approve?
Motion.
Mr. Walsh, do I have a second?
Second.
Is that you, Ms. Miller?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Clerk, please call the roll.
Commissioner Doherty,
Yes.
Commissioner Strack,
Yes.
Commissioner Miller,
Yes.
Commissioner Meyer,
Yes.
Commissioner Sabota,
Yes.
Commissioner Thacker,
Yes.
Commissioner Walsh.
Yes.
Motion carried as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh, for catching that.
You're welcome.
At this time, I'd like to move on to item number 7, the continuation of the discussion of the city's comprehensive land use and development policies focus on existing land use and future land use maps and the public participation process. I do have the notice from the Northwest Herald for the publication. And at this time, I would like to turn things over to Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I put together a staff report with some objectives, some background information I'll go through briefly, and then we can have a discussion. So we had discussed a couple meetings ago about redoing our existing land use map, which we really did not have a very good one. And so before you is an existing land use map, which really depicts what the land uses are in the city right now. It's not what the land uses should be in the future, it's not what they were, it's what they are today. Now, I will tell you that when I got the map to begin with, there were several things that I found that were in error, so there probably are some mistakes. In fact, there are properties on there I know of that need to be corrected. So if you see something, just let me know, and we can, have that corrected. So, but I thought for the most part, it depicts a good representation of the land uses in the city. It also has a lot of useful, what I'll call planning tools on there that we wanted to have on there, including the existing and proposed bike trails, the future paths or bike paths are on there, including the parade trails. It shows the schools, the healthcare facilities. If we came up with a different land use category for every land use, we'd have about 1,000 different categories. So, like for the municipal center, even though it's zoned RS1, we kind of just labeled it municipal center. But we did put healthcare facility for like Sintegra and also Mercy. So, because we do have a healthcare zoning district. And we did put on there, we separated the fire district, the schools, the parks, and that type of thing. We had talked about having one map, and I think if we had one map, it might have gotten a little busy, and I'm kind of glad it turned out this way. The second map you have in your packet is the city of McHenry's adopted future land use map. That's the map with the colors on it, and then it has the purple shading around it, and the colors in the middle, and it says future land use map on the side. And that's really what our future land use map is as of today. And that map was adopted back in 2005. Our comprehensive plan and development policies, the actual text was amended in 2008, but the future land use map was not amended with the future land use, or was not amended when the comprehensive plan was amended in 2008. So this map was not really hasn't been looked at since 2005. And it really is a pictorial, I call it a pictorial policy document. It's what the city council, the planning and zoning consider what the city should be in the future. What land use should go where, what should be residential, what should be commercial, etc. You'll see that the boundary agreements are all on there. They're all different colors, so you can kind of discern which boundary agreements are where. Now, some of the boundary agreements are a bit funky as to where they go, and believe me, if you look at the boundary agreements separately, they look just as funky. So it's hard to depict them any clearer. And the expiration dates are on the legend on the side as well. The third map, which we will use as part of this process, is the really just is the map that we kind of want to focus in on with the other two maps on the side, and that's the corporate limits map of the city. So that's really just the city boundaries as they are today, and then it has the kind of the purple area, which is the 1.5 mile buffer area around the corporate limits of the city. And the 1.5 mile area represents the city's extraterritorial planning jurisdiction. And that is the statutorial planning area which the city can plan for. So we can plan for land uses within the 1.5 miles beyond our corporate limits. So we can say we'd like to see residential, 1.5 miles beyond our corporate limits. And so you can see also that the boundary agreements are on there with the expiration dates as well. So as Chairman Strack noted, we have I did put a notice in the paper because when you amend your comprehensive plan, you're supposed to have a public hearing, and that's really for its adoption. But seeing as though we're going through the future land use map, we're discussing really the a really important part of the comprehensive plan or the future land use map. You really want to try to get the public involved, but as you can see, putting a notice in the paper doesn't really do it. I'll get to the public input process in a second. I just want to finish up on the maps. So we did 3 maps, and hopefully that kind of gives a pretty good idea of kind of an overview of the city and kind of what we want to look at. Now, what we're suggesting on is taking the maps and kind of looking at the city in manageable sectors or areas. And not looking at the city and saying, okay, let's look at this one parcel over here and say it should be residential. So I think the best approach to updating the future land use map is probably taking the blank map with the extraterritorial planning area and saying, how do we divide the city into 3 or 4 different areas, and using what's planned for the city as far as the future land use map in 2005 and what exists today, and then using all the the bike paths and all that, and all the planning tools, etc. So and dividing the city into different areas, using roads, railroad tracks, river streams, those are good types of boundaries or borders to divide a city. And whenever we look at an area of the city or a chunk of the city, I think we should look at them all the same. So whether we're looking at the northwest part of the city, the southwest, the northeast, or the southwest, we should look at the same. We should look at them all the same way. The first is we should look at them in terms of really simply land use and transportation, and then try to keep it simple. And from there, we can branch out into other different planning things. And then we should transition from one area. Once we look at one area, we should transition to another area of the city. But we gotta remember that when we're looking at maybe the northwest part of the city, we're gonna be transitioning to another area of the city, and we're not just planning the northwest area of the city without thinking of the southwest area of the city, that they're all integrated. So we're not playing in a vacuum, basically. So, land use, transportation, and then, of course, we take into consideration environmental conditions of the area, housing, open space, employment, those are all things to consider. If there's things that we need information on different areas in the future that we don't have now, that's stuff that I can get in the future, that's no problem. As far as public input goes, I'll advertise every time we do this in the Northwest Herald, just because, I think we should do that to comply with the law. But I think the best way to get public input is to go through what we're doing now and kind of discuss this, come up with a future land use map that we all think is the best future land use map for the city and the best future land use map and concept for the city. And then once we all agree on it, I think we should kind of advertise that for public input. And then, and do that in various ways. Post it at public places, maybe have a meeting at the library, like try to go to the public. I don't think putting a notice in the paper is gonna get it done. But I think we should do our best to try to get people to comment on what we think the future plan of the city should be. So I think that's the best way to get the public input involved. There's other ways to do it. I mean, we can try to get people here, have focus groups, but if we can all agree on something, and if people show up and want to comment, sure, they can comment. But if they don't, I think we should come up with something and then try to kind of go out and see comments on it. So, in closing, I think, once we get a future land use map that we're all comfortable with, once we kind of go out, get some public input, and we feel like we've exhausted that and we've gotten some public input or we've attempted it, I think we can present the future land use map and the other things that we've done to date, such as the consistency policy, et cetera, to the city council for adoption in the next couple months. I don't think the future land use map is going to take forever. And then I think after that we can come back and we can look at the text of the comprehensive plan and kind of look at what chapters of that need to be updated. Like I said, that was updated in 2008. And I put on here that one sheet that we all kind of agreed on at the beginning of the topics that we wanted to keep in mind. And I think a lot of this is going to be factored into the comprehensive plan text, but I think it'll also be factored into the map as well. And then as a last statement, I put on here I thought this was good. I got this from Phyllis Walters when she was a recorder. Just a basic division of land, just for your edification. So I know I've kind of rambled on, so I'll just.
So good, thank you, Doug.
I have a question.
Yes.
So are we going out like 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? What do you?
When you do a comprehensive plan, I mean, you can 10, 20, 30 years, you could, I wouldn't go more than 20 or 30 years. I think the thing you think of is how often you revisit it. And you revisit it according to how often circumstances change. We haven't revisited our future land use map. Now, we probably should have done it sooner than now.
I was looking at a subdivision, or not subdivision, just for instance, like on Richmond Road, there's a bunch of broken down homes up that way. And I was like, oh, that'd be good for commercial. And then I just see a brand new house being built up there. And I'm like, how do you treat something like that? Because I think, by Richmond and Grand, they tore one down.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
And I was like, oh, I thought that would be, slowly that would kind of go into a commercial.
Well, I don't think you should let one occurrence change the way you think about a whole area. But I think, in answer to your question, I think you want to look at least 20 to 30 years out, but you also want to consider that you revisit a plan like this. You know, if things are booming, you want to revisit this in 5 years to make sure, you know, you're staying up to date or current with your plan. If things are stagnant and nothing's changing, you know, maybe 10 years we revisit it.
I think ultimately 5 years is the goal, is to say every 5 years you look at this, and again, it's gonna depend on what the economy's like, what our growth is happening.
So what we put down on paper we should do for 5 years?
I think you need to look at.
At least
you need
look
to-
at it.
You need to physically be thinking long-term, maybe 20 years, but the fact of the matter is, we should be probably revising this every 5.
Yeah, okay.
Well, and I think Doug's comment a couple meetings ago about this plan hasn't been touched, and yet we're making decisions without looking at it because we know it's wrong or it's out of date. So if we 5-10 years out in the future of what we perceive our city to be, that helps us make decisions tomorrow because it's in compliance or looks like what we think it's gonna be 10 years from now. So I get that.
It's hard to think 15, 20 years out, but I wouldn't let, like what you just said with the one house, I wouldn't let that, I think your thought is on the right track. I wouldn't let that stop your thinking that way. Just because of one house is constructed, I wouldn't say it's a done deal, forget it.
Yeah, might be a dentist office in 5 years.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
Doug, do we advertise these meetings on our city website?
The packet's always on our website.
I mean, to generate more people, more of the public, make them aware.
It's always on our, I mean, we can definitely step it up. I mean, they're always on our website. We could put it on the front page. I mean,
That's what I suggest, like the front page, that way you get more people viewing.
I mean,
I think the goal, though, like Doug said, is let's get a basis down.
Oh, no, when we're ready.
And then we'll push, we'll have Doug do the Facebook, you know what I mean, all of that.
We need to get
Yeah,
ready for that.
absolutely.
We all need to be on the same page.
Granted, it definitely needs to be pushed to the public hard once we get to that point.
Correct.
But I think we probably have a couple meetings before we really get to that point, you know, before we really wanna have that critique come in from the public of where we're going. I think ultimately might be 3 meetings before we have that really assembled. So as Doug said, I'm sorry, are you done with that?
oh yeah, I'm done.
So, just to clarify, I just didn't want to cut you off.
No,
To clarify, I think, in looking at everybody's map, everybody has a map out, and Butch has his map next to me here with what he believes is probably some landmarks to try to cut the city. And I think that's a pretty accurate. What I would suggest as well is taking the railroad tracks as our north-south, and then Route 120 as our east-west boundary, and then just looking at those 4 quadrants on the map. And then I also think that cutting it into 4 sections is a great way, but I also think we need to look at the downtown as the downtown, as a separate entity, maybe a 5th category in the mix of this plan, because I think ultimately we have a lot going on in that area as well, and some of our concerns that business owners in town and the public has brought to our attention is parking situations, which council has, you know, recently started to address some of those things as well. I think those are downtown issues that probably might even be raised closer to now for us to look at the downtown as we have some growth going on downtown and some things happening. I think that might be a great 5th category, looking for everyone's input on that as well.
So you'd want to look at like Main Street and Green Street, and Riverside Drive, kind of all as one.
Yeah, so
I mean, they're separate, you know, geographically, obviously, but they're all, 3 are kind of the same boat.
Yeah, I think, if we have 3 distinct downtown areas, and that's some people think that's bad, some people think that's good. And I think it's good But I think we can, and I think the way the future is, there's a few things. We're going more towards, you know, a younger demographic. We're going towards active, healthier communities. We're going towards more people wanting to live downtown, renting, more towards, so we want to, I think what Sean is kind of getting at is maybe extending out from downtown and drawing from the downtowns.
One of the things, so I've been thinking about this for a while. When Doug and I first sat down and talked about looking at the current land use map and the future land use map and doing this, actually, Mr. Walsh and I attended the training that was done at the Village of Lakemore. They brought in a consulting firm to do the planning and zoning, kind of what you're really looking at. And one of the things that Jim and I both agreed upon when we left that meeting was that this process that we do on an everyday basis, without a current land use map, without a future land use, and without a really great comprehensive plan, you know, it's just a little bit tough for us to do. And so ever since that meeting, I've had this thing in my head that I'd really like to really look at the downtown and try to figure out a way to kind of create a downtown where we don't really have one. We have these three main areas that what I consider our downtown, and I've really been kind of thinking about this ever since that Lakemore meeting. And the map that I just handed out is something that I just kind of threw together. I just took the land use map that Doug gave us. And what I was thinking about, and work with me on this if you would. So we've got in bold, you can see the Metro station. They've just got the word Metro. That's kind of where the current train station and that vacant lot is. Now, my thought process is we create, and again, this is just an idea that I had. I want everybody's input and to kind of get your take as well. But I would like to create maybe a loop around the city. And maybe this is a pedestrian walk, and it incorporates a lot of different aspects of the city. But if you started at the Metro station and you went down Main Street, and I've highlighted the path, you would go down Main Street, come down to maybe 3rd Avenue, come up 3rd to Waukegan, and Rotary Park is there on the corner. Maybe utilize Rotary Park to make an access down to the Riverwalk, that future section of the Riverwalk. Follow the Riverwalk down to Green Street. You'd have your access to Green Street at that point. You'd go down the Riverwalk to Riverside Drive. You'd cross over. You'd have all of your access to Riverside Drive. And then you would follow the sidewalk all the way out to McClellan Lake Road. And then we have an empty intersection at McClellan Lake Road. There's sidewalks on the majority of that. There's just a short strip in the northernmost portion of Riverside Drive that's not completed. But it wouldn't be a hard project to finish. At that point, we've got a great run all the way from the Metro station out to McClellan Lake Road. We would follow McClellan Lake Road back to Route 31, cross over Route 31, and again, this is pedestrian or bicycle traffic. We would go all the way out to Peterson Park, which would tie us back to MCCD's path right in Peterson Park. We have restroom access at Peterson Park. We have concession access at Peterson Park. And then follow that down the railroad tracks on the bike path, right back down behind the Jewel, cross over, be at Fort McHenry, where we also have restroom availability. We've got a nice park there to use. And then tie that right back, cross over onto Crystal Lake Road, right back to the Metro station. If I remember correctly, the city owns the lot just to the west of the Metro parking lot where Bus Ford's old service center used to be. That's our property. So we could potentially make that kind of the parking hub, if you will, and create a way to actually physically tie all three of those areas together in a great way to make a pedestrian walk, and yet utilize all of the business and some of our parks and recs availability as a phase one of a downtown loop, if you will. And I don't know what we call it. Again, this is something that's been I've been thinking about for a while. And then there's some availability at that point to make maybe out behind Fort McHenry where the ponds are and Boone Creek runs that direction. We could make another path, maybe just a limestone path that would go out and follow Boone Creek, maybe all the way out to Boone Creek subdivision, and tie back over to Bull Valley Road, which would then tie us back up to to the bike path right at the railroad tracks, and that could be a phase 2 situation. And then again, we could expand it from there. This is just something that, in looking at some other communities' information, and as Doug said, you know, everybody's looking at, we're having great success with the rec center. We're having great success with the kind of potential of doing a splash pad and a pool and all the other things that are happening. But to create some value in that loop, Main Street has always been kind of the stepchild, if you will, in this process because it's not tied together. This is a way to tie together Main Street, Riverside Drive, and Green Street all as one, create a real downtown focus, but yet have a great pedestrian walk all the way around that area that could be advertised as that. It could be easily marketed as a city loop or whatever we wanted to call it. We would be utilizing the bike path, the restroom availability. It wouldn't be a lot of infrastructure to put in to do something like that. And I think that's really the key, right? What can we do inexpensively to try to create a draw to the downtown market? And so for me, this is just something that I wanted to share with you guys and let you guys kick around and you know, kind of throw on the table. Because I do think whatever we do with the rest of the plan in those other 4 quadrants is really critical to what we do downtown as well. I mean, if you look at some of City Council's focus right now at parking downtown and some of those things, our only draw right now is to those areas. And if we had like people parking in that Metro lot area and being able to utilize walking all of that distance 3 seasons of the year, that does create a lot of nice space to really, you know, try to sell and improve the rent prices on those areas as well. You know, Main Street's rents would go up because now we've got a lot of pedestrian traffic, a little more draw to those areas. Just something that I was kicking around, so I'd love to hear ideas from everybody and what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I had brought up in one of those meetings, like those rent-a-bike systems like they have in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
You could put one at the metro station, you could put one downtown. People get off and they could ride around downtown or on the bike path, and it doesn't create parking problems because you can park those anywhere. You know, you put your credit card in, they got your number, and you can park it anywhere because they're all interconnected. And that would not only help, you know, just pedestrians be able to enjoy downtown, or go on your bike path and ride around and get some exercise and then
Right.
the bike path.
And still enjoy the downtowns.
And
You can
that's-
do them both.
It's very cheap, and I'm sure you can get some
So
help with that.
we've been working with Zaxter for,
That's the bike company.
Is it? Okay, great.
Yeah.
for the past a year probably almost. It's I hate to compare it to Divvy because it's not Divvy, but it's basically so that's what this
You all
page
have that
is.
page that was in your.
These are the proposed stations. These are not set in stone. We are proposing as a staff that the city, this is a minimum, this is a leasing program, and they utilize the local bike shops to maintain the bikes. And each station, I think, has 5 bikes. Is it, Dorothy, 5 or 6?
5 to 6.
Five.
It depends.
And it's a 2-year commitment, and then they help you go out. And so we're hoping that we get that the city funds 1 station. So this is basically you control everything with your phone. They're not massive setups like the Divvy, like 15 bikes. They're I think 5 or 6. It's about a 100 by 20 foot pad. You go up with your phone, unlock it, and they you pay for it with advertising, and that's what this is. So we've been working with them, and the thought would be that if it took off here, it'd expand in the county.
Oh, yeah.
Aurora has it. A lot of places have it throughout the country, but this is really we're trying to. And what Sean, when he proposed this idea to Dorothy and I thought it was a really unique concept. It's something that really lends itself to what the Zaxter, what Sean had said with the rec center. We're trying to distinguish our community as a destination. And also with the downtown, everything emanates from your downtown. If you think about it, it's almost like concentric rings. So if you're gonna plan, you might as well start with your downtown and go from there. So that's my 2 cents. I thought his idea was I loved it. I mean, of course, I want your feedback, but it really lends itself to putting our community on the map, utilizing the resources we have in terms of the natural resources, the parks, but also taking the downtown and stretching it out to the neighborhoods, and then developing the land uses around that. And then also hitting a lot of the ideas on what we're gonna be seeing in the future. So I'd welcome other people's feedback on it.
Sue?
I love it. And you're absolutely right, most of the infrastructure is already there. It really is signage and identification.
Right.
And of course, my mind went immediately to painting on the sidewalks, you know, what your locale is, what your mileage is,
Right.
where's your next stop point. You could sell on-street advertising, and it could pay for the maintenance of that repainting every year just through corporate sponsors.
You know, along that path, you could have like sponsors from like shops and say, hey, you're hungry, you know, Cindy's Cupcake Shop is here, you know, a mile up ahead.
Well, think about it. I mean, my thought was, you know, as you're walking down that path, when you get near Green Street, right? I mean, you've got a little directional arrow, you know, cupcakes 0.3 miles, whatever that may be, right? That logo in the distance to go get those things. You know, my wife and I have walked Lake Geneva many times, and it's one of those destinations that we like to go to. We'll walk, sometimes we'll do the whole lake in a day, the 21 miles. Sometimes we'll do half and spend the night, and then we'll go walk the other half. You know, obviously we're not looking for that scale, but I think in what the draw is to Lake Geneva is to be by that downtown area, but yet still have the recreation so close, which is one of the reasons why I've been thinking about this, because we've done that so many times, and it's great. We'll walk into town and get a sandwich, and then we'll continue on our way. And if we're gonna generate more revenue from the city, and we're gonna look at what our real plan is, drawing that foot traffic to the city. We've talked in our last few meetings about, you know, how e-commerce is changing that retail storefront availability and what's happening to our retailers. You know, becoming a destination for something else, right? Now we've got a little draw, maybe we start to draw more of that artsy craft, but higher end type items along the Riverwalk, those things, getting the end of the Riverwalk finished up, and that kind of thing is really gonna change the look of that. You know, eventually whatever happens with where the current sewer treatment plant is out on the river, that's gonna change things and be a destination as well at some point in time, is my guess. I don't know what the city's plan is for the rest of that.
Well, you know, in the city, once you get the artsy people down there, next the trendy people move in and the artsy people move out, and after the trendy move in, then other, you know, like, I guess more of a family oriented kind of thing moves in. I mean, that's just the way it goes.
Yeah, I just think there's, you know, I'd love to hear everybody's ideas. I think there's a lot of things, Sue, you touched on a lot of the things I thought as well. You know, the infrastructure's there. We have restrooms available in a couple locations already. And then we're downtown. We've got Veterans Park. If someone needs a restroom, they can just shoot right up Green Street to Veterans Park, or from Riverside to Veterans Park.
And they're not stuck to the loop.
Right, they can go all over.
How the loop rolls,
Yeah.
you're not stuck on that loop. It's not like the bike path where you're stuck on it. So, okay, I've walked my mile, I'm done. I get off the loop, and I just take a regular street back.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the great thing. And again, I think, you know, maybe an interactive map on your phone, you know, that's available that we could put together of the loop. That would be great as well. Talk about generating some advertising dollars from that online map so that people can see, oh, here's where I am on the loop. Where's my next restaurant? Where's the next place I can go? I just think there's a lot that could be done from it. And again, a lot of the infrastructure in my head was already there. We're talking about nominal sidewalk on Riverside Drive, all the way out to Peterson's already done. Although maybe, yeah, I think all the way to Peterson is done. You could either cut into Peterson Park, or you could just continue to the actual path. You know, if somebody wants to ride a little farther north to the Rusty Nail and have lunch, they
Past
could.
Peterson's done.
All the way past Peterson's done now. So I mean, you know, all that infrastructure is already there. All the way back to Fort McHenry's done. There's restrooms there. Really, we're talking about this Zagster bikes being put up, which is already a process that's happening, and very nominal dollars to be spent to create it. You know, it just kind of seems like something that could be an easy tie to bring Main Street into the loop and create something a little bit different, like you said, so you don't have to go all the way to Peterson Park. If you just want to shoot right back down 31 into town, you can. And to Joe's point, those buildings that are on 31 that are currently residential, you know, maybe that draws more of that commercial space. Maybe a dentist buys one of those buildings and moves into it, and now that becomes a little bit more profitable as well.
Where was Main Street to Green Street? Where's the connection there?
So my thought, Joe, in my head was to run Main Street to 3rd, go north on 3rd because we have Rotary Park on the corner,
Got it.
and then create, that would be the only other piece of infrastructure we would have to do was be, my thought was to put some kind of a path through Rotary Park to the very end of the Riverwalk. So coming west from Green Street on the Riverwalk right now doesn't really entail anything.
Right.
But in the Riverwalk, the future plan of the Riverwalk, that is actually all finished space behind Landmark. And so we could tie that there at some point in time, but for now, we could just bring, you know, you could just come all the way down Main Street and then just come up Green. But in the future, I would say it would be great to utilize Rotary Park to tie it to that section of the Riverwalk and then be able to start the Riverwalk right from there. Because that gets my commercial space on Main Street handled. But yet now I'm also showcasing a lot of the older properties that we have in the downtown, that Main Street, 3rd, all of those properties that have been, you know, here for a long time. What a great way to showcase some of the staple landmarks in town to be able to come through that way. And then to be able to be on the backside of Landmark to feed that as well.
Okay, what's the initial draw to get people to use this?
Well, for someone like me, Butch, I mean,
lot of
we
marketing.
walk all the time, so I mean, for me,
No, I
that would be a
understand
great
that,
move.
but what's the initial draw to get people to come to McHenry and use?
It's a lot of marketing. I'll tell you, I was just in San Antonio, and people go to droves. Now, initially, I don't know.
Well, I'm still looking for the draw. What
Well,
are they coming for?
Oh, it's marketing of whatever this is called.
Okay, but what is it?
Well, we've got the McHenry Loop / Riverwalk.
Okay, what's the draw on the loop?
I would kick it, this is my idea, I would kick it off with like wave runners somewhere by the,
Right.
You got the river.
you know,
Right.
because it's perfect. It's
Yeah.
no wake all the way in there by Buddy Z's. Put something right back there with wave runners, with all that action right there. It just takes, that's very simple. Get someone down here that would want to do that.
Yeah, the point I'm trying to make here is that there's got to
That's
be an
an
initial
attraction.
draw to get people
Right.
And that's
to
a
McHenry to use something like that.
No one
Let's
else
go to
has
McHenry
something like
and
that.
use
We have it
that.
sitting right here.
Yeah.
But Butch, I think initially, ultimately, the draw is really just, you know, health-minded people want to go, they want to go somewhere. They go to Moraine Hills, they go to Glacier Park, they go somewhere to walk, to see some outdoors.
Okay.
This is just a way for them to be able to walk this loop, and I haven't mapped the distance of it, but I would bet it's probably 4 miles, maybe 5, if you did the whole loop. So I'm taking just health-minded people. Again, we weren't sure what we would get out of membership at the rec center, and here we've probably
Right.
doubled
You know
and
what you're
tripled.
doing? It's just like shopping local. It's getting people who already shop to shop at your own businesses. So you're not necessarily trying to draw people here. You're just trying to get people who already do what they do to do it more this way.
Well, I think the initial draw, in my opinion, the initial draw is, for someone like me, I'm a local and I'm gonna shop as local as I can, but I'm a health-minded person. I walk a lot. My wife and I will walk. We live 1.5 miles from downtown on Green Street. We walk into town all the time. So for me, it would be great to be able to go over to the metro station, grab my dog, and we would walk the loop. I mean, we would just go walk the whole thing.
Right, I don't want to be a cynic, but when
No,
you wait a second. When you walk into town 1.5 miles, how many people do you pass?
Well, on Green Street, I pass quite a few.
Do you really?
There's a lot of people who walk.
Now, but again, once I get to town, I mean, once I'm off the Riverwalk, I don't pass a lot of people on that stretch.
Right,
But on Green Street, I actually pass quite a few.
okay.
But this is a long-term plan too, you gotta remember.
No, I'm understanding that, and it just goes back to what do you want McHenry to be? Do you want McHenry to be a destination place? Do you want McHenry to be a manufacturing center? Do you want McHenry to be a commercial center? I mean, in a long-range plan, you have to decide
Absolutely.
what is gonna be the core business or plan for the area.
if you look
So I'm
statistically,
gonna make
go
it
ahead,
look
Sarah.
just a little different direction.
Yeah.
This exists.
Right.
And nobody's using it because we haven't put it in their face. So I could leave my house, I'm on South Street, and I could do this right now that Sean's just put this in my face. I've lived in this town my entire life. I never put that on a map. I never said I could leave, and if able, and on my bike, I could make it all the way around 5 miles and be back home. Never put it in my head. So if we build it, there are people that will use it because they're using it already. I live on the bike path. In the spring to late fall, there are hundreds of people walking the bike path because they have nowhere else to walk. Now, that is not an easy path to walk. It's big stones. It's not flat concrete because they don't know about that path.
And you're bringing people downtown.
Well, if
And
you go
that's
south
the
to
goal.
Bow Valley, it's not easy because there's nowhere to get off.
Right.
Well, I would tell you, I mean, I have lots of my friends that run the bike path, and my wife and I, we ride sometimes we'll ride all the way to Genoa City on the path. You know, we like to do it. The problem going south from McHenry is if I want to ride from the north side of town down to Crystal Lake, like Sue said, there's not even a place to get off the
Get
path.
off the path, yeah.
And so there's no facilities, there's nowhere for me to buy anything until I get all the way into downtown Crystal Lake. Here, we have an option of being able to draw some of the bike path business into the downtown to use our services, and now they can loop town, end up at Peterson Park, and then just continue back up the path. So maybe those Crystal Lake bikers decide to come to McHenry because they can ride a short amount, come into town, lock their bike up, walk around the downtown, or just be on their bike, and then catch Peterson and go straight back up the path, or head back to the Crystal Lake area.
So there's an existing audience already.
There is, and I think as everybody's kind of mentioned, like, the infrastructure's really inexpensive. And so, like you said though, Butch, we have to pick what it is we want to be. But I think if we look at the demographic that Doug's talking about and the future demographic of who's here, if you think about what happens in Chicago and other markets where we're close to metro, we're close to public transportation, we're close to those things, the rental market's larger, the condo market's larger because I don't need a vehicle. We talk about parking issues in the downtown market. You know, this is just a way to maybe tie that together to have a little bit of a draw. And because the infrastructure is so little, it's kind of a no-brainer.
And Metro's not gonna be expanding anytime soon. I mean, and you know, when we were doing the bike path extension, the leg from Bow Valley to 31, somebody got up and spoke, and he was an avid bicyclist, and he said that, you know, he did a very comprehensive survey, and he surveyed all the businesses, and you said, what do we want to be? And I would say, there's a lot of, we want that manufacturing base down here, and part of the reason we put one of these stops down here is to get people around, to ride around the business parks. But he said people ride down the bike path, they will stop, and they go, where can we have lunch? Where can we stop? Where can we go?
Okay.
Off the bike path.
Yeah,
There's nowhere to go. From south of Bow Valley to Crystal Lake is 7 miles.
Yeah, nothing.
It's
Nothing, not a thing.
Nothing.
Good.
So I think it's interesting. It's a great way for us to maybe capture some of that market that's here and increase, again, I think, you know, a lot of the difficulty in the whole thing is, like Sue said, like, this has been here, right? And it's here, we don't really have to do a lot to make it work. But how do we take it to the next step? Which, how do we say, all right, we've got this cool path and we've got it all mapped out, but what does that do for us as a city, right? If we get people to come and use it, I think that will start to increase some of the retail space.
Oh, sure, yeah.
You know, I think it's just a way to try to build that downtown and try to tie the downtown together. I think that's part of the issue that everyone's always had was, how do you tie Main Street, Green, and Riverside together? And there hasn't been a great way to do that.
And there hasn't been. I mean, ever since I've been on Riverside, and
Right.
you know, I was down there for 20 years. We tried to put the 3 groups together, but they all had different identities. And I know down on Riverside, we said, well, let's focus on the river. That's our
Right.
great entity. And then we all went, oh, the back of our buildings are really ugly. We don't necessarily want to focus on the river. It has been difficult to tie them together.
And I will say a concern I have is you know, the population's getting younger, not older. And it is getting older, but.
Just look around here.
Well, but we have a very good manufacturing base of employers that cannot fill jobs. But the jobs they need are of skilled labor that is very difficult to find.
I know, but you guys have addressed that though.
No, we can't, not completely, but
No, but you've taken a step forward in that.
but
right?
this complements, because what this does is, it points out the obvious, but this is what they, millennials, whatever you wanna call them, demand. The amenities, the biking, the pass, we need to distinguish ourselves, because these companies down here, I'm getting calls, you know, I shiver when companies call me and say, I can't fill jobs. These companies, I'm getting calls every day that they can't fill jobs. Now, the schools are working, you know, the colleges are working, but that's the other part of the equation. And those jobs keep these stores open. So that's, which augments what you're talking about.
Right.
But I do think, you know, I think the river's a great tie as well, and
Yeah,
the
it
fact of the matter is that it runs up Riverside Drive, you know, as the Riverwalk project continues over time, and we know that, I did just see the updated plan for the Riverwalk and the remaining funds that are needed to get it to where it's supposed to be. They've broken those up into some phases, and hopefully they'll start to get, you know, pieces of that done. I think Miller Point is the next place that they'd really like to make that destination. So my thought, Butch, when Miller Point gets done, right, and maybe there's a staple on the end of Miller Point, whatever that would be, a restaurant, a brewery, condos, whatever
Where's Miller Point?
that would be the old Dobbins House location.
Okay.
So at that point, now we've got, I think, and again, I'm kind of speaking out of turn because I don't know what our actual ownership is, but I believe we have some slip availability that we could probably use at Miller Point as well. So now we've also got the fact that we can bring boat traffic in, and they're right on that path as well. Maybe we get some destination from the river to actually stop here and spend more money instead of driving up into the lakes and spending.
And we do have slips there. We do have day slips, and we are working with a developer on Miller Point
On
right
Miller
now.
Point, yeah.
So
I mean, I think ultimately in the long range view of things, for the cost of the infrastructure to do this loop or whatever the heck we call it,
Nothing.
it would be very minimal, and I think it does create some draw and it ties some things together. And then we start to say, all right, so what happens now? How do we base that from there? How does that change the look of the downtown, and what does it do for us? You know, I don't know initially if it does anything, but I do think it brings a little sense of the downtown being a real downtown where we haven't really had that before, even though it's a little bit of a stretch by going all the way out to Peterson. But I think, again, you don't have to go all the way to Peterson. You can just shuffle right back down 31, but I can if I want to.
it's not that much of a stretch, though, of a walk, I guess, stretch.
Right.
I think also it would bring some confidence to the business owners down there that we're coming up with a plan to like have all areas of that as considered a downtown area. And it kind of gives them a little good feeling like, hey, we're incorporating these plans to, you know, help draw some business and bring it in, and we have a plan of action.
Because I think, and to your point, Butch, who do we want to be? That's a very good point as well, is getting buy-in.
Right.
Because we're manufacturing, but we got small business here, and small businesses, 500 employees or less. I mean, we're all small business for the most part.
Pretty much.
Well, I think our first goal shouldn't be like drawing outside people into our city. I think that our first draw should be getting our city to use it first. Start small, get it, you know, the word of mouth going, and, you know, grow small and have it spread out that way. You get a couple running races in there, and all the runners talk. Next thing you know, you're gonna have more runners on that path.
Well, think about it. I mean, you know, this is something we could pitch to Hobson as well. Like, I mean, you know, maybe this is the new path for either the River Run or, you know, the Shamrock Shuffle or the Turkey Trot. Like, this is a great way to offset all of that space because it's already here.
Well, my only concern is that, you know, you're using like bike path that's existing, and then you said something about using sidewalks. I mean,
For the pedestrian traffic, not for the bike traffic.
Not for a run.
Yeah, but for pedestrian traffic would be sidewalk. And again, you know,
so you can have like a bike lane in the road?
well, right, so I was in, Crystal Lake today. As I drove through Crystal Lake, I had a closing in Crystal Lake today, and as I was driving through the downtown, you know, all they've done really, they haven't expanded their street width.
They painted a bicycle.
They just painted a bicycle on it to say, hey, this is a bike path as well. And really, that's all they've done. They didn't, nothing was changed in the structure of what they did in the downtown other than painting the bikes on the street. So again, cheap infrastructure, you know, not something we have to make a lot of revision for. But again, I do think there's a, you know, like Mike said, you run a 5K downtown like that and start to really make that your draw. And it's a great path because it's not really hilly, so the runners will be okay with that. It is a nice mix. You're running along the river a stretch, you know, a little elevation change, but not a ton.
There's a huge running community out there, and they're always looking for stuff like that. You know, like you let them run around and you see all those bike criminals, they're gonna come back and take their kids and go to a bike ride and see all the stuff, and it just slowly spread.
You know, one of the things for me, and Sue will probably say the same, you know, being in the real estate business, I think one of the things that I find a lot is the things we hear about from people is obviously schools are a huge important piece of that mix when people look at a community and why they want to be there. For my client base, and again, Sue can pipe in with hers, but Park District is the #2 thing that I hear about, that they want services available for their kids, and they want things like this. That mom that might work part-time, or maybe she doesn't work at all, she wants to be able to take her kids somewhere to do something, and that's a nice draw to that, whether it be, you know, only in the summertime or year-round. But I think ultimately, school's #1, Park District availability is typically #2, and then of course values are, you know, what is my shopping availability, what does the town look like? Those always in my realm, it seems to be third on the list. But boy, you shop with people who don't live where there's shopping available, and the first thing they'll tell you is, well, I need to move because I'm tired of having to drive so far to buy anything.
Right. How's that fitness center working out?
Well, I mean, you look at the rec center numbers and it's crazy.
Yeah, you build it, they'll come.
Yeah. Would you agree with that, Sue? I mean,
I would, and I would add to that, that because we have such a diverse downtown, people don't necessarily take the time to discover it, because they're driving, parking, going to the store they're going into, getting back in the car and leaving. When you offer a vantage point from the street side, you may get people who literally browse because they can, versus I've parked my car, I only want to walk 20 feet away from my car. You know, if you're already on your feet, you might go in and out of a store or just discover what's there. And that for newcomers or people we're trying to attract to the downtown area could be very beneficial. I often think of when I bought my home up north, I had no clue what was around me. I just thought it was a cool place. And they put all the little signs on the DNR pass, which are all drinking related, but I now know where those 15 establishments are off that path. And I would have never gone there if there weren't a little sign.
Yeah, and you know, that's the thing about it, is it's almost, like it almost seems too easy. We have this availability.
It's almost Mayberry-ish, and we're trying to overthink it.
Yeah.
I just think the bike accessibility is gonna be a huge draw, because like,
Absolutely.
you going downtown, it's 1.5 miles. If you could rent a bike and go down there, you'd rent a bike for $1 and drive down.
Well, here's the great thing, like Sue
Rent
just
your bike
said,
down there.
you know, some of the establishments are drinking related. Well, that's okay too. I mean, if that's what, you know, maybe a group is gonna go do a pub crawl and that's what they wanna do and they all Uber home from there, that's great.
Yeah.
If they're utilizing our downtown marketplace and they're doing the things we want them to do in town and spending revenue here instead of elsewhere, you know, if we can keep them here, if they're already here and we keep them here spending their money, I still think that's a win in the big picture.
We were just having this conversation at a closing. A few of us were saying there are 19 bars on essentially the square in Crystal Lake. So we could just get there, pub crawl it, celebrate New Year's, and, you know, limo home. We have that here.
Right.
But they're not attached. But they are, but we just don't map that because we're divided.
Right, because and that was the big thing for me in this, is trying to tie Main Street to the loop. Because honestly, like, that's the hardest part of the whole mix.
We have 4 taverns on Main Street.
Well, and restaurants and
I don't know
all.
anyone on McHenry's rank.
and, you know what I mean, and all kinds of businesses on that street that have always had a hard time surviving in comparison to the other two. And we have to tie that together somehow.
Right.
Yeah, it's tough. So that's my pitch. Again, sorry to take up so much of that on this subject, but I do think that the downtown, if we're gonna look at doing something in the downtown market, it has to be something feasible and not a lot of infrastructure dollars to be spent. And I think this is a way to do it very inexpensively.
I think that's a winner. Yeah. Just did.
Creative thinking, Sean. Very
Thank
good.
you, Roger.
Very good.
When do you hope to get this complete?
Well, I mean, honestly,
Okay, so that's
You're
now
thinking
Doug's
of,
cue.
you know,
well, but I think, I mean, ultimately, Mike, if we're talking about sidewalk on Riverside Drive, and we're talking like 1,000 yards of sidewalk that's missing, it's not a lot. The Metro lot we already own, the Zagster bike situation is kind of in process. Other than some signage and some painting on the pavement, there's not a lot to do.
It's paint.
I mean, we could potentially pitch this to council. I mean, this is a spring project. I don't see this taking very long. It's really mapping it out and figuring out what Zagster's schedule is to get the bikes in. The bigger question would be phase 2 and 3. You know what I mean? If it worked, we haven't spent a lot of money to make it work. So, I mean, again, we do sidewalks, we pour sidewalks in-house, I believe. We do contract that out from the city as well. But I think a lot of it is done in-house, and we're not talking about a lot of revenue. I can't imagine council would oppose it. But I've seen crazier things.
So Riverside Drive though, we have sidewalks to Weber Park, and then across the street is sidewalked.
West side of Riverside Drive runs all the way to the almost the 1700 block of Riverside Drive. When you get to the 1700 block on the west side of Riverside Drive, there's no more
By
sidewalk.
Crittenden's,
Right,
right
right.
before the intersection.
Right. So then when you
Comes to
get to
the-
the intersection though, that's already, all that infrastructure's there. And then
Right.
all of the rest of it's already done.
Right.
Restrooms are in. And then the other thing that we're not even touching on is the fact that Veterans Park is the hub in the middle. Right, because now that really feeds out to all of that area as well. So talk about making Veterans Park your highlight right in the middle of the loop. And then I have restroom availability there and of course the Zagster bikes, right? They're gonna service the Bike Haven and those guys would be servicing those bikes as well, and they're right there. So,
Like it.
Yeah.
Are Veteran Park restrooms on any schedule to be improved?
I thought the same thing.
Now that you just said
I was
that,
just thinking
I
of
mean,
that,
they're not very modern and they're not very nice.
I don't typically use them, so I'm not sure. I
Are-
have to see.
And any thoughts?
Well, I think ultimately if
I
we
don't
pitch this,
know. I have to look into that. I don't know.
They just need a facelift. I mean, the building's
Oh,
fine,
they're gonna
but you
fix it
open the
so-
door, they're nasty.
I'm serious.
yeah. Well, I think, I mean, again, so right, if in fact we pitch this to council, I think that's one of the options that would need to be on that pitch would be, yes, we have restroom facilities at Veterans, but ultimately if you're gonna create that traffic, we're definitely gonna need to change them. But you know, what does that cost look like? Like you said, the structure of the building's okay, it really just needs a facelift interior wise.
I think you have to, if you do something like this, you're gonna want everything along the way to be kind of up to snuff, so.
Yeah.
I mean,
But Mike, does that answer your question about timing? I mean, I don't think there's a lot of infrastructure to put in place.
Right.
Other than what we're talking about now. I think it could be really easily done.
we're hoping that, and the Zax is all predicated on, we'll see, you know, if the budget, the budget gets approved and Zaxter helps you, if we fund the station, then that's more likely, then Zaxter will help us get funding for the rest of the stations. Then our goal would be this year, hopefully late spring, early summer.
That'd be great.
I mean.
Sean, on the 1700 block of Riverside then, is that in the city or is that out of the city?
It's sporadic.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
sporadic. So
So
like I just,
1811's in,
Right.
in,
So you,
Yeah, where the road
regardless if
narrows.
they're in or out of the city, you just put a sidewalk.
yeah, where the road's real thin, that's not in the city.
there's not a whole lot of
I used to
sidewalk.
deliver newspapers, I know last time was
There's
1635.
not a whole lot of sidewalk.
Well, you know where
up
it
there.
is. I mean,
I know exactly, yeah.
1811 is the split level used to be the dance studio years and
Where
years ago.
Hillside is.
Right. So yeah, Hillside Drive is right there. That actually she annexed into the city, and then we just turned that property. But again, the properties on either side are not in. So again, would it be tough for us to get an easement from those people to put sidewalk in? I mean,
It's right by Timber Trails.
yeah, it's where Timber Trail, the back of Timber Trail comes out there.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
So does anybody have any questions? Any other comments, concerns? Doug, what would we need to do to pitch that to council?
Well, if you want, I could maybe go back, work with Chad to
Have him highlight that map?
highlight maybe the phases Sean talked about, and maybe we look at, I think we have to maybe look at some of the peripheral land uses,
Sure.
because I think some of the, like especially the northwest part of town, maybe take one more look at this. Is everyone all right with that?
Yeah.
And maybe kind of put some hard lines on this, and then maybe what we discussed with Dorothy and I, phase 2 and 3, we can put those on, so at least you have an idea of what he proposed at the creek. It was the same kind of thing, just extending outward, kind of following the lines of the bike paths. And then we can look at the land uses. I'll have him do it on the future land use map, so then we can kind of see it all on one map.
And Doug, when you have him do that, if you would have him do that in something that's like really bold for us to see that outline,
Yeah.
Bigger.
Yeah.
a little larger.
A little larger. would
I
help.
asked where my table-sized map was.
You're gonna
Oh,
be
I'm
sorry
sorry.
you said that.
Doug, you're back. If you're gonna do it on a map this size, but just do Main Street, 3rd Street, like that. Don't put all this other junk.
Yeah, have him scale it just to the downtown for that use.
For that use.
Oh, okay, I got
Don't
you.
put it on the other.
All right.
You know, try to scale it down so it's not the whole big map. We just look at what we're talking about this proposal.
But maybe do all the phases.
And then he could do one big one just with all the phases on it.
All right.
But I think if we're gonna look, cause you're right, I mean, once we get, if in fact this is what we wanna pitch, we need to really look at all the rest of the land uses that are adjacent to that. We really need to look at what that infrastructure looks like for the future of that as well, because, you know, my thought is, okay, so the corner of Riverside and McClellan Lake Road, there's an empty lot on the corner right there. You know, so I would think, okay, well, would we put a temporary little vestibule up there with, you know, garbage can, maybe a bench?
Southwest corner.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, so like that's an area that I think, you know, now that development actually becomes a great piece of land for somebody. We've created some value for
Right.
that piece of land where we didn't have that value today.
Well, like what Joe was saying, you know, with the Richmond Road thing.
Right,
you
same
know,
thing.
You know, so, yeah, all right. All right, let me see what I can do.
Okay.
All right. I will attempt to get that done for January. I don't know what his schedule, so I'm not gonna.
Well, the meeting's a day earlier than was that.
Thank you, Jim.
24-hour meeting.
Thank you very much, everyone. That was a great discussion.
So
Sean, that was good.
does anyone else have any questions about cutting the other 4 quadrants up though? I think talking about that just to finish up that
Yeah.
section. So we would use the railroad tracks as our north-south divider and Route 120 as our east-west. And then we would just number those 4 quadrants, and then over the top of that, we would lay this loop in as kind of our downtown. That way we could kind of, like Doug said, you know, if you look at those rings coming out from the downtown, then we could really start to establish what that looks like. And I think traffic becomes a question, as Doug said, that's probably one of the first things we need to look at is that traffic flow and how that looks from the downtown out. You know, that's always the question as well. If we're gonna create something like this in the downtown, then how do you continue to have traffic as your input to it, but not congestion? And that's always the tough part. You wanna talk about a bypass so that people that they don't have to come downtown, but now you've taken away all of your downtown traffic.
Yeah.
It's always, you know, 6 of one, half dozen of the other, which is the right answer.
Is there a phase 2 for disaster stations, like, we don't have one here, we don't have one in downtown, right? I mean.
Veterans
proposed.
Park.
But that's, I'm talking like, where the stores, where the movie theater is.
Like those stations are what we're proposing
Okay,
first.
okay.
Well, Miller
And so
Point's
there's
on
gonna
the
be
list.
different waves of stations?
No, that's all phase 1.
Right, And then phase 2 would.
Well, if that is
Depends on
if
popularity.
that's a raving success, I mean, we could, you know, on funding, we could, the plan would be to go county-wide, but as far as we're concerned, we could go as many as we can fund.
Okay,
Well, I think
They're
to
about
that point-
9,000 a year.
I think to that point, though, the question becomes, to Jim's point, like, are those locations set?
No.
So at that point, you know,
No.
if this plan were to
Right,
go into
that's
place,
right.
maybe we would adjust some of those to say, all right, let's get them, make
Yeah.
sure that they're closest to the loop. But for now, we have Veterans Park, Peterson Park, and Miller Point are already on there, plus one at the metro station.
yeah.
So we already have 4 of the 6 are already really in a decent place on the path.
Yeah, the one at the Prairie Pack and Bull Valley is probably the one that's probably not gonna, it might move because we put that on there because that section of bike path that's gonna be built to get to Moraine Hills, but that's probably not gonna be constructed for a couple of years, so that probably might not go on there. But Sean suggested at the rec center, which or here also, I thought that was a pretty good idea.
You know, if we moved it to the rec center, you know, and we had that here, you can access the rest of town from here as well. Again, just a
Pool,
south end of
everything
the,
else,
of the development draw.
Yeah.
But yet now I can still tie them all back to that as
Yeah.
well. To Doug's point, we're not sure when MCCD will finish that link from the current path this way so that you can catch Marine Hills. But I think once that's done, there's a huge draw as well. I mean, lots of people visit Marine Hills.
Do you put those next to a parking lot? Is that where you put those?
You just need like 100 by 30 to put a pad, and then you basically, the bikes are on you just need 100, a very.
Well, do most people walk to that, or do they drive to it and they park?
Either one.
I would think you'd drive to it.
You need both. I mean, like
So they
some
gotta
with
do
the
a
parade
parking
path,
lot.
they park right there, or some people go downtown, and they have different types of bikes too, depending. I mean, you can have family bikes, you can have off-road bikes.
I'm gonna
But
need
the
to
ideal
ask-
spot would not be on Green Street, because there's no parking there already, right?
Right, so ultimately, that's why Miller Point was the chosen
Right.
right there. Metro
Veterans
Station,
Park.
Veterans Park, where
Gotcha.
there is accessible
Where there is
parking.
parking,
There is parking, okay.
yes.
Any other questions, concerns on that topic?
Not on that topic, but just want to know if we're going to deal with the not in the city properties during any of this.
That's kind of a policy issue with the council. You know, they've taken it up in the past and it's not gone anywhere in the past.
What's the holdup on it?
Just haven't wanted to address it.
Because we got a lot of pockets that aren't in the city. I mean, a lot.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you know, you could, as part of the process, you know, certainly, you know, make a statement or a policy as part of this process, but that's ultimately gonna be up to the council as far as what they wanna do or take any action.
I've had a question, I've wondered about this, and it's obviously a legal question. There's pockets right near my house. As an example, you have, let's say along Crystal Lake Road, Crystal Lake Road and Glenbrook Trail, I live on Glenbrook. So houses right there, right along Crystal Lake Road, south of Glenbrook, they're county. Okay. And their backyards butt up to city, the trails of Winding Creek. So now you have an individual living in the city with bad asthma. Now the county, they gotta conform with burning what the county dictates, and let's say they are. And you've got the person that lives in the city that's suffering from asthma. Now, the city, the way I look at it, like I said, I'm not a lawyer and it'd be legal, but the city can do something about that by annexing in that property. You see what I'm saying?
Not necessarily.
Well, that's what I'm asking.
If it's totally surrounded by the city.
In order for
What's just about every,
you gotta be
I
60 acres or less and you're surrounded on all 4 sides.
which this house would be.
Again, that's a council decision to force annexation.
But what I'm saying from a legal standpoint, so-and-so suffering with their asthma, they've got serious health issues, the city could add some in, it isn't. You know, it's a Sue Happy Society, I'm not going there, obviously, but it's always been a question.
Yeah, but
of
is
mine.
it, I mean, this is a philosophical debate, obviously, but I mean,
That's what it's for, so.
oh, but has the person ever approached the neighbor?
Oh, I'm just using that as an example, I don't know.
Well, I think
don't know.
though, Roger, I think to answer your question though, I think as we start to look at this process, that's something that we need to send up to council.
Well, you know, that happened with the property, you sold Raven's property there.
Mhm.
They were burning back there, and, oh my God, you wouldn't have believed it, the city of McHenry police went over there, and, you know, whoever they talked to gave them the famous word, I'm county. And,
Oh, there's a
but-
lot
but-
of
but you
arguments
know
for
what,
it,
they said,
yeah.
yeah, but with your burden's affecting, on
Right.
First Lake Road, all that, you stop right now, yeah.
Yeah, it's a tough situation, but I do think to Doug's point, you know, as a recommending body, that's what we're here to do, and if we recommend that and council chooses to move forward with that decision, then that will be up to them.
God, I was recommending that when Steve Buda was.
I would recommend it from the standpoint of they're using our infrastructure, our roads.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
And because that's the standpoint from really your purview, you know, and they're not paying for them. They're not, they're adjacent to.
It's an education process as well, because those homeowners are very aware that they're not in the city of
Exactly.
McHenry. And they're in the county, and they're the first to tell you, oh, you can't touch me, I'm in the county.
My brother was one of them.
And there's an education process
Yeah.
about, yes, you're using our services. You ask them where they live, they don't say McHenry County, they say McHenry.
Yeah.
So there was a time when we needed to respect all that, but there's a time where to do this job right, we can't have all those little white boxes in our city.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough for sure.
It's a
And a
tough
lot of the
decision.
holdback on it is, a lot of them are on well and septic, and there's improvements that have to be made if they're brought into the city, I understand that, but, this is a long-term planning process. I mean, pay for your, sewer and water extension over 20 years, 25 years, who cares?
Right, and again, I think as a recommending body, that we definitely have to look at that as we start this process, and every one of these quadrants that we look at, those are the recommendations that we need to send up to council.
Yeah.
Now, a tough one would be like, Denny Harms, you know,
Sure.
we don't, he's county agricultural, McHenry doesn't have agricultural, you know, so.
Again, Roger, now's the time for us to make those changes.
Well, and he could put a cell tower on his property and we wouldn't have a thing to say about it. And he doesn't have to go to a hearing,
Right.
Or horses, horses.
you know, I mean,
Farm animals.
that's something, that's a good point. I mean, that's something that you wanna make, that impacts people and
Sure.
adjacent land uses.
Well, it impacts our map. I mean, if we have to look a mile and a half outside of our borders,
Mhm.
we need to look in our borders.
Right.
And many of those unincorporated pockets are non-compliant with the properties around them.
Right, the burning
So-
example is a very good example because it's very real and it's one that people can relate to.
Right, right.
I mean, you could drive down Route 31 in a car and smell fire,
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know?
But I do think that, you know, as this committee is concerned, I think as we start to look at this process, those are the things that we need to put on the table. If we're looking at a 20-year plan to be revised on a, let's call it for now, a 5-year basis, I think those are definitely things that need to be addressed and brought up to council as well.
But I would encourage you to take the maps and those types of comments that you just made, Roger,
Mhm.
and think about those for the next meeting, write them down, mark up the map and bring them up at the next meeting,
Mhm.
So we have them.
So are we looking at the whole map, or are we picking a quadrant to
No,
start
look
with?
at the whole, I mean, the quadrant thing is just for our discussion purposes, but look at the whole map. Think about land use policies, like Roger was just talking about. But yeah, look at the whole map in general. And then when we get to a specific area, bring up those concerns.
But how do we want to look at the next meeting?
Yeah,
Do we want to, we probably need to have a focus, as Sue's asking, what are we focusing on for the next meeting? Are we truly focusing on just the downtown for the next meeting? Or should we look at that first quadrant and say, okay, start to have some ideas on number one?
Oh, I see what you're saying. I maybe,
Or is the downtown area for the next meeting enough? Because if in fact we look at this, trying to tie those together, now we're gonna be looking at, okay, so then what happens to those properties along that path?
Right.
Do we have potential use there to go to business use as Joe brought up? Does that change our perspective on some of those in the downtown market as well?
Yeah,
Well,
if we can
let's-
get the drawing, if we can get the drawing for the path that you delineated there.
well, that's what he kinda gave you. I'm
No, I
gonna,
understand that, but we wanna, so we can actually see.
Yeah.
See it.
You know,
Well, and then when we look at those uses on that map, because then that's gonna change the way we kind of look at what's
Yeah.
along that path as well.
I think we
As long
should
as we
focus
brought
on the
that up.
downtown.
Yeah, as long
I
as
think
you
we
brought
should
that
keep
up.
going in that
We
direction.
have good momentum.
Yeah. keep-
So then, my suggestion to everybody is for the next meeting that, you know, the map that I gave you, although it's a little rough with just that short little thing, and maybe you drive it, maybe you just take that path and drive the path as much as you can to understand what those empty properties are along that path, what business uses are there now, and what potentially the future looks at on that path, because you know, here we've got businesses on the north side of 31 that can be accessed from that as well. The stretch between McCall Lake Road and back into town is a great section of that stretch as well. You know, I think there's a lot that comes from that downtown area. And we can make that the focus for next time, and then we'll jump into the next phase of, okay, which one of the 4 quadrants do we want to pick next?
And I'll try to get these to you as soon as I can.
Excellent. Doug, how about a staff report for us?
The next meeting is,
The 17th.
are you sure?
Yes, I am.
Thursday.
It's a Wednesday.
So the next meeting would be January 17th, 2018, as approved in our previous notes from earlier in today's meeting.
And we do have the one case, right, Dorothy?
Yes. Well, yes.
Thus far.
We don't have to check yet, but yes.
what do we got?
The check's in the mail.
It's for a tattoo parlor on Main Street.
No.
Tattoo parlor on
By
Main
where?
Street?
The tattoo
Well,
parlor.
that's gonna get shot down because there's one negative vote already, because it's against his moral turpitude.
The young couple that has the one on 120, he got his,
Is it open yet?
well, he's got the window, he's
Yeah.
got, it looks pretty sharp, I have to admit, yeah.
This is a young couple and it's gonna be appointment only and they're very, very,
We
they have a good plan.
we talked.
4 to 3, it'll get
Shut.
shot down.
We'll see.
Guaranteed.
We'll see.
And then we'll try to have I'll try to have something on for this too.
And then, anybody have any other additional questions or concerns for Doug before we adjourn?
I see the Dunkin' Donuts is open,
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes. The drive-through works very well.
good.
Curb's a
Nice.
little close, but I've only hit it a couple
How
of
fast can you drive through it?
times. Before or after I'm caffeinated.
Yeah, exactly. On the way in or out?
Depends if the tap's up or down.
Yeah.
At this point, I'd be looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Mr. Meyer, who was my second? Mr. Thacker on a second. Anyone opposed? Meeting's